Wonderful seminar that we're having here. I'm very honored to present the next panel, and it's integrated by our scientific committee for the Sacred Spaces Colloquium. So I will present each of them. The panel is called Life and Death in Sacred Space, Fecundity, Contagion, Sacrifice, Martyrdom. And our first presenter is Dr. Robert Markens. Robert Markens received his doctorate in anthropology from Brandeis University, Massachusetts, United States of America, and has been a researcher since 2011 at the Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. He has taught classes at several universities, which include the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, the Universidad Autónoma de Benito Juárez in Oaxaca, the University of Chicago, New York University, and the University of Costa Rica. Most recently, he is co-author of the book La Piedra de la Letra de Santo Tomás Jaliesa, Oaxaca, published in 2020 by INA, the Mexican National Institute of Anthropology and History. And we will listen to his talk called Jaguar and Bat Claw Drinking Cups from Monte Alban, Oaxaca, Mexico. Ancient Zapotec rites of ancestor veneration, auto-sacrifice, and warfare. Dr. Markens.
Thank you so much, Erica. And before I get started, I would like to give a very sincere and heartfelt thanks to my colleagues at the UNAM Chicago and at the University of Chicago for bringing all the resources together necessary to make this a reality. It's been a wonderful experience so far, and it's really a privilege to be part of it. Okay. Yeah, that looks about right. I like small things, but in small things, big messages are conveyed. So we will talk about, or I will talk about today, about Jaguar and Bat Claw drinking cups from Monte Alban, Oaxaca, Mexico, ancient Zapotec rites of ancestor veneration, auto-sacrifice, and warfare. So they really do get to the heart of what we might call cosmovision or cosmovision. Okay. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Mexico, southern Mexico and Oaxaca, I put a map up for your orientation. The state of Oaxaca within the República Mexicana, and the arrow points to one site in particular of the Zapotec civilization that I'll be talking a lot about. Okay. The brilliant pre-Hispanic Zapotec civilization that flourished at the urban center of Monte Alban and many other communities, large and small, in the valley of Try that again. Okay, let me try that again. The brilliant pre-Hispanic Zapotec civilization that flourished at the urban center of Monte Alban and many other communities, large and small, in the valley of Oaxaca, Mexico, is famous for its grayware ceramic tradition. Not only did the Zapotecs, or Binisa, as they called themselves, use pottery for the preparation, serving, and storage of food, as in most agrarian societies, but they also fashioned clay into paraphernalia used in the political and religious realm that were bold in design and in many cases direct in the messages that they conveyed. The best known examples are the effigy vessels commonly known as funerary urns that were placed in the family tombs beneath the house floor. This paper focuses on another uniquely Zapotec yet enigmatic class of pottery that has curiously received little attention. These are the Jaguar and bat claw drinking cups used throughout the late Classic period, that's from 500 to 850 CE, which were placed in tombs as well. They are also found as fragments in the rubble overlying house floors and in public spaces where presumably they were used. There are good reasons to believe, as outlined in this paper, that the cups functioned in domestic and public rituals wherein warriors petitioned the spirits of deceased family members and rulers for success in battle. As such, these drinking cups were part of the equipment belonging to the complex of Zapotec beliefs and ritual practices aimed at world renewal through ancestor veneration, warfare, and human sacrifice. Answers to the questions of what the Jaguar and bat claw cup vessels signified and how they were used remain elusive because the cups are always presented in museums showcases and treated in academic publications with passing reference to their context of discovery, and further still, they are separated from the objects with which they were once united in ritual practice. Nonetheless, much can be learned about their meaning, the nature of the rituals of which the cups were part, and even the potable that once filled them. To do so, three tasks must be realized. One, consider the principal aspects of Zapotec cosmovision or worldview, since sacred objects like the drinking cups embody or are related to these ontological principles. Here I consider three of their ontological principles: the mountain of sustenance, Nahualismo, and ancestor veneration. Two, one must take into account the object's context of use, including other classes of objects with which they are associated. And finally, three, bring together a large number of examples of the form under study, as numerous iterations of an object class often point to disparate yet related aspects of the rite of which they were a part. To arrive at my goal, I will go through a number of digressions, so I ask your forbearance, please. Zapotec worldview, that is mountains, jaguars, and bats. Jaguars are ever present in the imagery of ancient Mesoamerica. Nonetheless, they were imagined and portrayed quite differently across time and space. Like all signs, representations of the jaguar are polysemic, having multiple and variable indexical and symbolic connotations. To understand what jaguar claw cups meant to the Zapotecs, we must first consider more broadly how they chose to portray this feline in other contexts. And here, the Zapotecs were remarkably singular in their depictions. At Monte Alban and other valley centers and beyond, paramount rulers, that is kings and queens, were always represented in public art as jaguars or wearing jaguar costumes. Most often, they are portrayed as seated or standing on a stylized pyramid or hill from which an ear of corn sprouts on either side of its peak. These are the stylized corn cobs that come out of the peak. This is about the most fidedigno or resembling ears of corn that we find. In other examples, they're just tendrils, but by grouping together many different examples of the same image, it reveals itself to be corn. At Monte Alban, other valley centers and beyond, paramount rulers, that is kings and queens, were always present in public art as jaguars or wearing jaguar costumes. Most often they are, I'm sorry, I read that part. So they are seated on what looks like, most often they are portrayed as seated or standing on a stylized pyramid or hill from which an ear of corn sprouts on either side of its peak. This is the Zapotec icon of political power par excellence, and it is a uniquely Zapotec vision in Mesoamerica. You don't see this in other parts, although the Monte Sagrado or Montaña de Sustento is common throughout Mesoamerica. It has a particularly Zapotec uniqueness by positioning the political ruler, the Jaguar Lord, on top of it. Further, the Jaguar Lords in these and other instances are frequently engaged in menacing acts, such as such as eating human hearts that drip blood. We know it's a heart in the upper image because in another context, we can see the same trilobe sign in the slain captive shown below. The trilobe sign is in his chest cavity, and blood issues out and drips over the edge. And these are signs that we will see again and again in jaguar and bat imagery. Not only are they eating human hearts, the jaguars that drip blood, there are other images that show them swallowing a warrior whole, seated again on top of the pyramid or montaña sagrada. Or we also see, for example, in the image to the right, where a jaguar lord is sporting the decapitated head of a rival jaguar lord in his upturned paw. Or we also see jaguar lords, as we see seated on the hill on the left, scrutinizing bound warriors paraded before them. In other presentations, blood glyphs appear in the mouth. The constancy of this imagery goes to the heart of Zapotec worldview and the nature of political power by referencing two of their ontological concepts, the mountain of sustenance, which I alluded to already, and Nahualismo. That is the belief that each person shared his or her being with one or more spirit companions or alter egos. In this case, the jaguar was the Nahual of rulers. The Zapotecs, like most, if not all Mesoamerican peoples, conceived of hills as mountains of sustenance, a kind of orographic cornucopia that gathered together in its interior an inexhaustible reserve of water, plants, and animals on which the community depended. For this reason, Zapotec urban centers were located adjacent to a prominent hill, and in the case of Monte Alban, this sprawling metropolis was established on the crest of a mountain atop its very own mountain of sustenance. Surely this was the most sublime of foundational acts in the ancient valley. The resources stored within the mountain were not available to members of the community free for the taking, but belonged to a supernatural entity whose permission had to be sought through petition and secured through offerings before tasks of farming, hunting, the collecting of plants, or other extractive endeavors could begin. Traditional Zapotecs today refer to the mountaintop supernatural entity whom they invoke simply as the dueño, or owner. The dueño's pre-Hispanic counterpart was clearly Castillo, the god of rain, who often appears seated atop the mountain of sustenance in Zapotec imagery. And this is the most succinct visual statement of one of the pillars of Zapotec worldview. You have to bring together quite a number of these images in order to see that Castillo really is the Lord that sits atop the mountain of sustenance. It's many of the other items don't combine the mountain, so it requires, as I say, bringing together a fair number to understand that Castillo is not only the rain lord, but was also seated atop the mountain. And really this goes to the essence of their worldview. So Jaguar lords shared the mountaintop with Castillo, not only in Zapotec art, as we've seen, as it is the icon of political power par excellence, but also in their lived experience at Monte Alban and elsewhere, since the Acropolis with its palaces and temples crowns the peak. The spatial proximity of Jaguar lords to Castillo implies that there may be other less obvious but transcendental connections linking them, and these are suggested in some of the depictions of Jaguar lords. The Zapotecs were captivated by the jaguar. It is mysteriously reclusive, living in the Monte, or mountains, where it makes its lair in caves and rock shelters. In fact, The Mexica or Aztecs referred to or have a term connecting jaguars with mountains. It's called Tepeyolotl, and it means heart or essence of the mountain. And the image was always the image of a jaguar. So in the Mesoamerican mind, there was a very tight connection between jaguars and the Monte. The rulers' exclusive symbolic appropriation of the jaguar as their nahual and the depictions of them as hunters engaged in menacing acts allude to their role in society. In social terms, predation is a metaphor for warfare and immolation, and suggests at the very least the jaguar lords were protectors of the mountain of sustenance, and in this capacity, essential to community survival. More broadly, they may also have acted as agents provocateurs, agents propagating warfare and sacrifice. The Zapotecs had a symbolic relationship with their gods. They had a symbiotic relationship with their gods, much in the way that their contemporary descendants have with the dueño today. In exchange for rain, fertility, and other blessings, the pre-Hispanic Zapotecs appear to have offered what was most precious to them, their blood and life itself through human sacrifice, hence the necessity for warfare and the role of jaguar lords in organizing this enterprise. With this in mind, we can extend the meanings of warfare and sacrifice associated with jaguars to the jaguar claw cups. These cups are readily identifiable as representations of jaguar paws by the band of sinew that encircles the claw at its base, a feature of felines. Representations of the bat, on the other hand, are far less prolific in Zapotec art. Nonetheless, their significance is plain to behold. To begin with, bats and jaguars share key features in nature. Both are denizens of the Monte, or mountains, where they inhabit caves. Some species of bat, like the leaf-nosed bat, are also carnivores, like jaguars, as they feed on the blood of mammals. These shared traits appear to have captured the imagination of Zapotec artists, since their representations of bats and jaguars are practically identical. What sets them apart in votive clay objects is the appendage added to the forehead of the bat. This is perhaps an exaggeration of the fleshy nasal extension that characterizes this species and was added by artists to signal that it is the bat that they wish to portray. Moreover, it is the carnivorous leaf-nosed bat that is specifically represented, since blood emanates from the mouth in many instances. This is a bat cup vessel. The flange, or the nasal appendage, is broken off, but it was very prominent, as we saw in the slide before. And these are the blood glyphs that, or epsilon, that appear in the corners of the bat's mouth, same as on jaguar figures as well. Jaguar and bat symbolism comes together in the claw cups found in household tombs. They are accompanied by another class of artifacts with related imagery that sheds considerable light on the nature and purpose of rituals enacted in the sacred space. These are pairs of ceramic cups. Sometimes there are two of them, and sometimes they are conjoined to form a single vessel. And they depict a male-female couple, identifiable by their calendrical names as Lord 1 Jaguar and Lady 2 Cornfield. As Jesus Galindo was explaining to us yesterday, that the ritual calendar consists of 20 day names, and people in the Zapotec world took their name from the day on which they were born in the ritual calendar. So this is Lord 1 Jaguar, and his consort was Lady 2. I can't see from this angle. 2 dots, or the number 2, and an ear of corn, Lady 2 Cornfield. And the same names are repeated in other examples, which I show you. The fact that these cups appear late in Monte Alban's history suggests that they represent historic rulers of the period who were deified upon their deaths. Were they gods or entes sobrenaturales, one would expect that they would have been present in the archaeological record from earlier times, but they appear mysteriously in the late Classic and disappear shortly after the decline of Monte Alban at the end of the Classic period. This royal pair also appears they also appear in the format of effigy vessels, but here they are unnamed, and their imagery is especially striking for one important difference with the simple cups. The male figure, identifiable by his breech clout, or taparabo, appears to be a standing jaguar, but the appendage on his forehead clearly marks him as a bat. So there's a substitution, or more accurately, a transformation of the jaguar into a bat. His companion, Lady to Cornfield, remains unchanged, wearing the quechquemitl, or cape, a traditionally female garment. And here are other examples to show you how rather common they are in the archaeological record at Monte Alban and other related sites. In other iterations, the couple holds a, yeah, okay, I guess. In other iterations, the couple holds a spear and shield, and their heads appear to be encircled by a radiant halo or resplandor. In one particularly clear example, it can be seen that the halo is actually a descending bat alighting on the shoulders. And I've outlined the bat with this orange line. So he is descending, or the bat is descending. You can see his face in red with the nasal appendage. His rear feet are up towards the sky, and his arms are coming down on either side of the bat figurine below him. Here, Lord 1 Jaguar and Lady 2 Cornfield are armed for battle. They are portrayed in clay at the moment that their Nawal, the bat, descends from the sky with wings spread and takes possession of them prior to the onset of battle. So it would appear that the bat is a special Nawal of Jaguar lords invoked preparatory to conflict. More generally, the Jaguar and bat are signs of war. So these effigy vessels, together with the bat and jaguar cups, were likely parts of the equipment used in rites related to warfare. By their proximity to family tombs, they refer to a third principle of Zapotec worldview, ancestor veneration. From the time of the founding of Monte Alban at 500 BCE, Zapotec families began interring their dead for the first time in household masonry tombs installed beneath the floor of the house. And this suggests a change in the way the living regarded and interacted with the souls of the dead. Each family buried fathers and mothers generationally in the tomb, while children, infants, and other adults without their own household were buried individually in shallow graves. Those buried in tombs were the most immediate link to the supernatural realm, and their souls were regularly petitioned by the living for blessings of fertility, abundant crops, and as we see here, for success in warfare. The primary, and here's a schematic drawing of what your typical Zapotec house would look like, with its central sunken patio. The tomb is constructed beneath the house here. You can see that there's a skeleton with votive offerings that have been placed within it. The door is sealed shut, and the space above this venerable place for the dead was the main place where ritual was probably performed. The primary space for veneration rites was not at the tomb's threshold, but apparently in the room overlying the crypt, and that is why archaeologists find abundant fragments of effigy vessels, censers, figurines, and bat cup vessels in the rubble overlying the house floor. This space was fully accessible to the family, whereas tombs were kept sealed with a large flat stone placed in front of the door. The access way was filled with earth, and the hole in the patio floor leading to the tomb was patched with stucco. To the contrary, the tomb would have filled with water from summer rains, falling into the open-air house patio. But it is also clear that on some occasions, perhaps upon the death of a parent or on the day of a special event, that the tomb was reopened, rites were performed, and votive objects were sometimes deposited. Who would have participated in this ritual, this warfare ritual? Two extraordinary ceramic statues from the period provide an answer. Each of these two statues depicts a warrior who carries a bat or jaguar cup in his hand. In full battle regalia, the young men wear skirts of olivella shells and necklaces made from human maxillae, or upper jaws. One wears an upturned trophy head around his neck. Given these details, I envision warriors in proximity to the family tomb, soon to join the battle, are engaged in these rituals of petition to their ancestors. Curiously, a third statue, ceramic statue, was recovered in the rubble of Teotihuacan. It's a statue, again, of a warrior holding a shield, and in this case, it's a central Mexican deity, Zapotec, associated, again, with war and sacrifice. Okay. What did the drinking cups contain? It is a good bet that they contained the blood that the warrior drew from his body as an offering to his ancestor and deified rulers. In support of this hypothesis are several claw fragments incised with the sign for heart and blood that we saw earlier. It's the same glyphs appearing on these fragments of bat claw vessels. In support of this hypothesis are several claw fragments incised with the heart and blood glyph recovered from the rubble of the main plaza at Monte Alban. So the next step in this study would be to do an analysis of residues from bat claw vessels to see if proteins compatible with human blood can be found in the base of these vessels. The same claw fragments found in the main plaza suggest that rites of warfare were enacted publicly, and this would not have been the first time at Monte Alban where rites of war were carried out. The Dansante Gallery, or more correctly, the Temple of Dansantes, constructed about 300 BC, is one of the most extensive sculptural programs from late pre-classic Mesoamerica. It features young men bleeding their genitals and invoking their ancestors who hover above them in preparation to war. This is one individual dansante, and the portion of the wall that's still intact shows several individuals that may be in the act of having bled themselves from the genital area, and these horizontal figures between the upright vertical slabs are interpreted as ancestors being invoked by these warriors preparatory to war. This is an analysis recently, not so recently, 10 years ago, that was proposed by the epigrapher Javier Orcid. And with this, I can sum up where I started, that the Zapotecs, like other Mesoamerican peoples, had a symbiotic relationship with their gods, and in this context, the jaguar and bat claw drinking cups were part of the equipment of the complex of Zapotec beliefs and ritual practices aimed at world renewal through ancestor veneration, warfare, and human sacrifice. Thank you for your attention. Yeah. I was there on Saturday and took the picture.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this fascinating talk. It's always a great pleasure to listen to Dr. Markens' talks. I especially enjoyed that drawing of the Zapotec house. I remember we had a couple of talks about the Day of the Dead some years ago during the pandemic here on YouTube. And I remember Dr. Markens saying about this practice, because we talk about the Day of the Dead and whether it comes from pre-Hispanic times. And he said, well, it wasn't a day. It was on a daily basis that the Zapotecs had this relationship with the dead and the offerings and the rituals. It was not one day. So, but I enjoyed looking at it in this graphic way. Thank you very much. And well, if any of you haven't been to Monte Alban, I very much recommend a tour with Dr. Markens, which we did last year in the first part of the, thank you, in Oaxaca, and it was really wonderful. So thank you very much. Okay, so our next talk is by Claudia Brittenham from the University of Chicago. You all know her by now. The Castillo at Chichen Itza and the transformation of sacred space in Mesoamerica. I will read a little bit about Claudia, just a little bit. She's professor in the Department of Art History and the Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity at the University of Chicago. She's also director of the Center for Latin American Studies, recently appointed. Her research focuses on the art of Mesoamerica with interests in the materiality of art and the politics of style. She's the author of Unseen Art, Making Vision and Power in Ancient Mesoamerica, as well as The Murals of Cacastla, The Power of Painting in Ancient Central Mexico. The Spectacle of the Late Maya Court, Reflections on the Murals of Bonampak with Mary Miller, and Veiled Brightness, A History of Ancient Maya Color with Stephen Houston and colleagues. Her next book focuses on the interconnectedness of the ancient Mesoamerican world. And I imagine you'll give a little bit of that coming publication. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Erika. It's so much fun to be on a panel with my two co-organizers for the Comité Académico for this conference. And so I want to thank them and all of the staff at the UNAM who have made this possible. We're honored to have Erika introducing us, and also the Newberry for giving us such a wonderful space to be here today. Okay, have we gotten to the point? Yes, I saw it. That's not it. There we go. One over, Castillo. Aquí estamos. Okay, here we go. Every year in March and September, throngs of tourists gather at Chichen Itza to witness a surprising phenomenon. On the spring and fall equinoxes, a serpent of light and shadow appears to descend the staircase of the Castillo, the principal pyramid at the city. In the late afternoon and early evening, the shadow of the pyramid's stepped body is cast on the balustrade of the main staircase, which faces north towards the causeway leading to the sacred cenote, likely that well of the ltza, for which the city is now named. The triangles of light between those shadows seem to flow from the columns in front of the descending serpents at the principal entry into the temple at the pyramid's summit, down to the serpent heads carved at the base of the northern stair. Marking a calendrically significant bifurcation of the solar year, this hierophany represents both a triumph of engineering and a fundamental transformation of the nature of sacred space in Mesoamerica. In today's talk, what I want to do is explore how the unprecedented scale of Chichen Itza's Great Plaza, or Gran Nivelación, combined with the properties of the pyramid at its center, took the familiar building blocks of Mesoamerican architecture and recombined them into something new, enabling novel forms of ritual observance grounded in a reconfigured relationship between spectators and celebrants. To set the scene, let's briefly review the dynamics of a traditional Maya pyramid. The pyramids at most lowland Maya cities during the first millennium CE were dynastic monuments dedicated to the memory of a lineage or a particular ruler who was often buried inside the structure. Pyramids represented massive accretions of stone and labor, visible from great distances, their roof combs sometimes soaring above the forest canopy. Yet the interiors of these spaces were quite restricted, confined only to one or two or perhaps three narrow rooms at the pyramid's summit, into which only a select few might enter. The focus there was on dynastic ritual, where descendants of the person buried within the pyramid honored their descendants or their lineage's patron deities, alongside other deities, perhaps even those Olis that we heard about yesterday, in the process reaffirming descent-based rights to rulership. These ritual observances were public spectacles, to be sure, in which richly dressed rulers, priests, and other elites would have moved in and out of those shadowed rooms of the temples, periodically presenting themselves to a public gathered in the space below. But the true heart of the matter was private, something in which only those at the summit of the structure could partake. Moreover, the address of those pyramid temples was unidirectional. In almost all cases, only a single staircase provided access to the summit, where there was only one entrance to the temple, and any space for spectators was arrayed principally in front of that principal facade of the building. If crowds gathered in the plaza below, their participation may have been quite secondary, limited to passive witnessing of the heightened experiences of those celebrants at the top of the pyramid. Reflecting the dynastic overtones of these sacred spaces, they were often quite close to the palaces and other elite residences of the city, which we can see in the case of the central Acropolis at Tikal, which is the royal palace just south of these dynastic palaces, or dynastic tombs, the same with the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, the tomb of its sort of most dynamic ruler, Inichana Pakal, and the palace directly adjacent to it. Now, by all of these measures, the sacred space at the heart of Chichen Itza was radically new. No Mesoamerican person entering the Great Plaza for the first time in the 11th century CE would have failed to be shocked by the scale, the grandeur, but above all, the newness of the space and the architectural forms that encompassed it. Yet at the same time, as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun, and Chichen Itza was no exception. The basic building blocks of that city, pyramid, plaza, ball court, platform, road, were the basic building blocks of all Mesoamerican architecture. Each Mesoamerican city assembled these forms in its own particular way, and no two Mesoamerican cities were ever alike. So what is it about Chichen Itza that makes its configuration register as a novel and even a radical break with the past? Now, in answering this question, it's important to acknowledge that Chichen Itza, like Rome, was not built in a day. I seem to be trucking in cliches in this part of my talk. I apologize. Although the city although we do know that the city expanded dramatically during the reign of Cacupac Awil in the second half of the 9th century CE, particularly in the southern part of the city that we call Old Chichen. And then that it was built several times in rapid succession. It was rebuilt thereafter. Both the Castillo and the Gran Nivelación that surround it were transformed in these rebuildings. Now, although many important questions remain about the scale and chronology of the earliest construction in that northern part of the city, right here, what we do know for certain is that the Castillo that we see today was not the first building to occupy this space. Excavations by Mexican archaeologists in the 1920s and 30s revealed a smaller structure encased within the present radial pyramid, as you can see in this reconstruction. And those excavations offered hints that yet another structure might lie inside the two known iterations of this pyramid, although that inner structure was too fragile and unstable to explore. But more recent remote sensing has reaffirmed the presence of this second inner pyramid, and also suggested that something like a cenote or cave might even lie beneath the Castillo, hinting at a multifaceted motivation for the building's placement in its present location. Now, the plan embodied by that inner Castillo, a 9-level single staircase pyramid, is a super familiar form in the Maya world, one long used for funerary pyramids of Maya kings, raising the tantalizing possibility that one of Chichen Itza's rulers might be buried within this pyramid, or perhaps even within that smaller pyramid, likely enclosed within it. So who's buried in Acupacal's tomb would be the cliche to answer this part of the question. Now, those two narrow parallel rooms at the top of the inner Castillo would not also have been unfamiliar at any lowland Maya temple of the classic period. Tikal's 9-level pyramids, remember, each have a temple composed of 3 corbel vaulted chambers instead of just 2 atop them, but the floor plan is otherwise basically identical. Now, at the moment that the inner Castillo was built, the Gran Nivelación, or Great Plaza, was also much smaller than the space we see now. We can see an excavation that's sort of revealing its easternmost limit. And so its scale would have been much more in keeping with the public spaces of other Maya cities. With its single staircase, the smaller plaza, and what appear to be residential spaces nearby. This early phase of Chichen Itza's Great Plaza would have felt deeply familiar to Mesoamerican viewers. It is in the subsequent Castillo that we see a moment of transformative breakthrough, the moment where a new form with lasting relevance and radical impact was first invented. Both the inner and outer Castillos are similar in many salient details. Both are 9-level pyramids with principal staircases oriented to the north. Yet the outer Castillo is crucially a radial pyramid with 4 staircases oriented roughly to the cardinal directions, integrating the pyramid with the surrounding plaza in unprecedented ways. Now, the Castillo is a strikingly erudite building, full of calendrical and numerological significance. Each of the 4 staircases, as I think we talked about yesterday, has 91 steps, which are the sum of the numbers from 1 to 13, or the product of 7 times 13. These are all profoundly significant Mesoamerican numbers. Combined with the step of the temple platform, these 4 91-step staircases yield 365 steps, as Diego de Landa first described in the 16th century, something equivalent to the number of days in a solar year. The 52 recessed panels on each side of the pyramid allude to the 52-year linking of the 365 and 260-day calendrical cycles. And as the sun sets on equinoxes, as I've already mentioned, the shadow cast by the edge of the building onto the northern stair creates the illusion of a descending serpent. Now, other numerological properties multiply. The 4 sides and 9 levels of the pyramid and the 7 angles of the serpent are all calendrically significant numbers, as are the 20 almenas, or roof ornaments. The Castillo impresses through its condensation of intellectual labor rather than its sheer mass. It's actually of only modest height by Mesoamerican standards. The Tikal temples are actually taller, and yet it dominates the plaza surrounding it. Optical illusions can make the pyramid appear more imposing than it actually is. You might notice how the moldings on each successive level of the pyramid grow smaller and smaller, making the pyramid appear to be taller and more distant than it really is. Now, most radial buildings in Mesoamerica were simple platforms, structures of relatively modest height, like the platform of Venus or the platform of eagles and jaguars on the Gran Nivelación, right in front of the Castillo. Radial platforms were a really common Mesoamerican form, which one would expect to find in the center of a plaza at cities throughout Mesoamerica, from the plaza in front of the Pyramid of the Moon at Teotihuacan, or in the middle of the plaza of the Ciudadela at the same city. They also show up at the principal plaza of Tula Hidalgo, the Great Plaza of Copan, or the platform in front of the House of the Governor, Aruxmal. In the Maya area, radio platforms held long-standing associations with timekeeping and the calendar. Beginning around the 4th century BCE, radio pyramids generally occurred as part of a specialized architectural complex called an E-group, consisting of a radio pyramid and then a long platform to the east. And these are named after the first such group, which was excavated at Oaxaca in Group E. From the stair or summit of the radio pyramid, the sun could be seen rising above the central structure of the long platform to the east on the spring and autumn equinoxes, and above the outer edges of the north and south structures on the summer and winter solstices. Now, although Oaxaca E7 sub was long buried by the time the Castillo was built, the twin pyramid groups of Tikal, erected every Atun or 20-year period during the 7th and 8th centuries CE, demonstrate that the association between radio pyramidal platforms and timekeeping was a persistent or at least a recurrent theme in Maya architecture. Yet from the E-groups of Oaxaca through the twin pyramid groups of Tikal, it was most typically a radial platform with no superstructure or only a very minimal perishable superstructure that carried these associations. Thus, one innovation of the Castillo lay in marrying the radial platform with the 9-level pyramid topped with a temple enclosure, combining the chronographic marker with the funerary monument in a single temple structure. Yet a more significant innovation had to do with the relationship between spectators and celebrants. The crucial point to understand about Oaxaca E7 sub was that the significant alignments on the solstices and equinoxes, for which one could argue that the entire complex was created, could best be seen from a very particular vantage point on the eastern staircase of the pyramid, just a few steps from the top of the platform. And let me tell you how deceived I felt, que tan decepcionada me sentí, when I realized for the first time that the point of observation where you really get this full phenomenon is not actually at the top of the radio platform where I'd always thought it was, but reading the excavation report more carefully, 8 steps down from the top of the platform. I've always wondered about that. But this optimal vantage point 8 steps down from the top of the platform could really only be shared by like 2 or 3 people at most. Though perhaps people standing other places on the eastern staircase or on the eastern top of this platform could have been able to experience a partial effect. But what people on the plaza could see, as we can imagine from Tatiana Pryskyrykov's reconstruction here, was not the full solstice or equinox effect itself, but instead the reactions of elite people with privileged vantage point who were witnessing those events. In other words, the alignment effects enabled at Oaxaca E7 sub and other E-groups had much in common with the nature of classic Maya ritual that I have outlined earlier. It was an affair by and for elites, where the role of commoners gathered in the plaza was primarily to bear witness. It is in this regard that the equinox phenomenon at the Castillo at Chichen Itza marked such a radical shift in Mesoamerican sacred space and religious practice. The serpent hierophany cannot be seen from the top of the pyramid. It can only be witnessed by the crowds assembled on the Gran Nivelación. Whatever other experiences this building enabled, and the rooms at its summit did construct novel and private forms of interior space, the most focal and heightened experience, authorized by the building, was staged not for the restricted few who gathered above, but for the crowds who thronged below. This democratization of sacred experience was a crucial part of Chichen Itza's novelty, and of its charisma as a pilgrimage destination. There are so few other places in Mesoamerica where you could go and experience the sacred in such a direct format, rather than watching other elites have a really special experience. Moreover, At the moment of the Castillo's transformation into the radial pyramid that we see today, the enlargement of the Gran Nivelación also revolutionized the space that surrounded it. Indeed, for a visitor, the novelty of Chichen Itza begins with that immense flat expanse at the center of the city. Now, every Mesoamerican city had its plazas, of course, but the principal plaza of Chichen Itza was unprecedented in size, an order of magnitude larger than the plazas at most Maya cities. In its final space, it was nearly 400 by 600 meters, one of the largest, if not the largest, open space yet constructed in Mesoamerica. And it's important to stress that what we see today was just a portion of that original cleared and leveled space that would originally have extended a little bit further to the north, all the way into this group of the 1,000 columns to the east, and way past the edge of the screen to the south. So it was, I mean, it's giant now, and it would have been even more giant in its moment. And as a result, it was far more labor intensive than the pyramid at the plaza's center. And the Gran Nivelación was built not just to hold the entire local community, which it could easily have done. We estimate that the population of Chichen Itza was probably around 30,000 people, and that's more or less how many people will be coming to Chichen this weekend to see the solstice phenomenon. Its size, and so it was built, so this is a plaza that was built to accommodate pilgrims from all over Mesoamerica, as it now accommodates pilgrims from all over the world. Its size staked an audacious claim that Chichen Itza was, in fact, that world center. This transformation of scale rendered the Great Plaza both familiar and strange. The flat, open expanse was immediately recognizable as a plaza, a kind of space that organized all Mesoamerican architecture, from the domestic to the civic, as you've seen in that diagram of a Monte Alban household that was once again organized around a small little central patio. Yet the unprecedented size irrevocably changed the relationship of individual to space. A single person feels dwarfed by the vast expanses stretching out around them, free of any reference to help them gauge scale and distance, and then further destabilized by the optical effects that make the Castillo appear so much taller and more distant than it truly is. The space is most effective when it is filled with thousands or tens of thousands. It is a space which is meant to be experienced collectively, in the process shaping new forms of subjectivity and collectivity in its occupants. Yet one more change was necessary to truly crystallize the transformation of sacred space at Chichen Itza, and that is the placement of the pyramid at the center of the plaza. This was yet another unprecedented step that transformed the meanings of both spaces and their reciprocal relationship. As you'll recall, a pyramid usually formed one of the borders of a plaza, closing off access and directing attentions to the activities played out on the principal stair and in front of the entrance to the temple, creating a unidirectional relationship between spectators on the plaza and officiants on the pyramid above. By placing the pyramid in the center of a plaza at Chichen Itza, and by choosing to make that pyramid a radial pyramid, one with staircases on all four sides, the crowd could surround the entire pyramid and perhaps even witness multiple events playing out on all sides simultaneously. The crowd could even move around in the pyramid in ritually dictated ways. Although the north side of the pyramid was clearly the principal one, given a particular kind of decorative emphasis in the form of serpent columns, and the serpent hierophany was to be viewed from the west, there was no longer simply one vantage point, simply one truth. Through this reconfiguration of one of the most familiar building blocks of Mesoamerican architecture, the architects of Chichen Itza rebuilt their city as the center of the known world, at a time when the borders of the known world were continuing to expand. And in the process, they irrevocably changed the nature of sacred space in Mesoamerica. Thank you.
Wow, Claudia, that was truly inspirational. Thank you for helping us see El Castillo with new eyes, like as an architectural innovation at the time. It's very interesting for me to see this being in Chicago, a city of architectural innovation. And I always enjoy here too the coming down of the sun between the buildings. So as you say, it's things that are new, but that have always been there too. And well, El Castillo is so photogenic. It's just so beautiful to see. And well, thank you so much for all your knowledge. Okay, so we'll continue with our third panelist today, Denise Fallena. She received her PhD in art history from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. Since 2014, she has worked as a professor of art history at the Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas, UNAM, sede Oaxaca. Her research focuses on devotional images in New Spain, but more recently, she has concentrated on the influence of medieval artistic traditions in New World visuality, particularly the usage of devotional books. Some of her books are La imagen de la Virgen María en la retórica de la conquista y Fundación en los Valles Centrales de Tlaxcala, Puebla, published by the Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas, UNAM, and Entre el cielo y la tierra, espiritualidad, eficacia y poder en 3 libros de horas del siglo XIV en Francia, soon to be published. So congratulations on that. And we'll listen to her talk titled Cholula, la Nueva Roma de América, the New Rome of America, el martirio en la retórica de sacralización del espacio tras la conquista. Thank you. Denise.
Thank you very much, dear Erika, for all your support. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Newberry, for hosting us. And I will do my reading in Spanish, if you don't mind. I will begin. Cholula, en el centro de México, actualmente ha sido considerada como ciudad sagrada. Desde tiempos precolombinos fue un importante centro ceremonial con una ubicación geográfica estratégica y señalado en el paisaje, especialmente por los volcanes que están muy cerca, que se ven muy cerca, pero también por la gran pirámide o Tlachihualtépetl, cerro hecho a mano, y que en tiempos novohispanos en su cúspide se edificó el santuario de Nuestra Señora de los Remedios. Déjenme ver cómo funciona esto. Sí, así es. Importante centro de peregrinación regional hasta nuestros días. Esta fotografía la saqué hace 2 semanas precisamente. Entonces pueden ver actualmente la plaza central, que es un gran jardín, y por otro lado tenemos la gran pirámide, me tocó iluminada, está muy iluminada, encima de esta gran pirámide que es, actualmente se le conoce como el Cerrito, ¿no? Tras la conquista, esta ciudad de indios en su gentilidad fue visto como la Roma de América, centro religioso por excelencia, prefigurado en su pasado antiguo y escogido por Quetzalcóatl, merced al mito trasladado al imaginario novohispano y su correspondiente identificación con el apóstol Santo Tomás, primer evangelizador de los indígenas llegados a esas tierras mucho antes que los conquistadores españoles. Digamos que esta es toda esta versión legendaria que se empezó a fraguar después de la llegada de los conquistadores. En 1536, Fray Toribio de Benavente Motolinía estuvo en Cholula y nos dejó una descripción de la ciudad. El fraile franciscano fue el primero en nombrarla la otra Roma, por la cantidad de templos que había desde época prehispánica. De esta manera, con el tiempo, se fue construyendo en el imaginario colectivo como centro religioso de peregrinación por excelencia. Cito, y a esta Cholola tenían por gran santuario como otra Roma, a donde había muchos templos del demonio, y dijéronme había más de 300 y tantos, como días hay en el año. Yo vi muchos, pero nunca los conté, y así tenía muchas fiestas en el año, y algunas de ellas venían de muy lejos. Fin de cita. Durante la conquista, Cholula representó un punto de conflicto entre los intereses tlaxcaltecas y el señorío de Moctezuma, lo que condujo a la gran matanza ocurrida en la Gran Plaza de Cholula en el año de 1519, precisamente donde ahora está este jardín. Este acto de extrema crueldad cimbró al mundo mesoamericano y resonó al otro lado del océano. En el imaginario novohispano, Cholula se vio en la necesidad de reconstruir su pasado mediante una reescritura de la historia marcada por la experiencia del martirio, aunque misteriosamente predestinada desde los tiempos prehispánicos a ser una ciudad de peregrinación y de profunda religiosidad, tal como lo fue Roma en el viejo continente, en donde los primeros cristianos fueron perseguidos y martirizados. La obra Brevísima relación de la destrucción de las Indias de Bartolomé de las Casas constituye un hito en la defensa de los derechos de los indios. El fraile dominico comenzó a preparar esta obra en la década de 1540 como parte a su debate a las leyes nuevas, y se publicó por primera vez en 1552 en la ciudad de Sevilla. En ella comparó la ignominiosa destrucción de Cholula con el gran incendio de la Roma imperial, punto de inicio de la persecución de los cristianos. Cito: dícese que estando metiendo a espada los 5 o 6 mil hombres en el patio se refería precisamente a esta gran plaza central, estaba cantando el capitán de los Españas, se refería a Hernán Cortés. Mira, Nero de Tarpeya, a Roma cómo se ardía, gritos de niños y viejos, y él de nada se dolía. Fin de cita. La descripción de Bartolomé sugiere que la matanza de Cholula se distingue sobre otras por su crueldad y por la cantidad de muertos inocentes, ya que estaban desarmados en medio de una solemnidad sacralizada y recibían a los extranjeros, es decir, a los conquistadores, en son de paz. El obispo de Chiapas concebía a los indios como el prototipo del buen salvaje, como el modelo del hombre propio de la Edad de Oro, que representaba el estado de inocencia y beatitud similar al de Adán antes de la caída y expulsión del paraíso. En el alegato lascasiano se describía a los indios desnudos, cargando su escasa comida, totalmente indefensos y apegados a la virtud de la pobreza. Por otro lado, Fray Bartolomé describía a los españoles como verdaderos demonios que masacraban sin piedad. Esto nos recuerda los relatos apocalípticos del fin de los tiempos y la nueva venida del Mesías según las ideas milenaristas. En su descripción también hay un eco de la matanza de los inocentes bajo las órdenes de Herodes para evitar la venida del Mesías, es decir, la idea de que el advenimiento del cristianismo fue inaugurado por el infanticidio de Belén. En este parangón, la cristianización de los indios en la Nueva España comenzó en Cholula, también con la muerte de corderos muy mansos, esas son palabras de las casas, a manera de ofrenda sacrificial. Déjenme pasar la siguiente. Ok, sí. Sin haber sido esta la intención del autor, es decir, de las casas, la obra de Bartolomé tiempo después fue usada para infamar los hechos de la conquista española en América y así dar inicio a lo que ya habían mencionado en alguna otra conferencia, la leyenda negra, entre los enemigos de España. En este mare magnum de denuncias y discusiones sobre los excesos perpetrados por los conquistadores en las Indias Occidentales, surgieron variadas construcciones discursivas que se difundieron a través de imágenes promovidas por los príncipes protestantes pertenecientes principalmente a la Liga de Esmalcalda, que estaban en contra precisamente en ese momento el emperador Carlos V. En 1598, basada en la obra de las casas, se publicó la obra Narratio Regiorum Indicarum por el calvinista Teodoro de Brie, que lo están viendo aquí en su pantalla. En esta obra, La matanza de Cholula, si bien tiene el propósito de denunciar los abusos de guerra que perpetraban los conquistadores españoles, se ilustra dentro de los cánones renacentistas del tropo iconográfico de los santos mártires. En el centro, vean, aquí está la, ¿cómo es? ¿Cómo pongo el, ay, ¿qué hice? No, ¿dónde está para el láser? ¿Es el otro? ¿El láser? No sé cuál es el láser. ¿Es este? Ah, ¿es este? Ah, perfecto. Ah, ok, aquí está. Es esta la imagen. Este es el frontispicio del libro de Brie, publicado por de Brie, precisamente para lectores protestantes haciendo toda esta denuncia. Y por otro lado tenemos, esta es la representación de la matanza de Cholula. Y es un grabado hecho por el propio de Brie. Ok. En esta obra, la matanza de Cholula, si bien tiene el propósito de denunciar, ok, eso ya lo dije, los cholultecas desnudos e indefensos, hombres y mujeres, son conducidos como corderillos al matadero, entran al templo que también es consumido por las llamas, la escena se observa nublada por el humo del holocausto que se eleva hasta el cielo y designa el lugar de la destrucción. Pero esta idea del martirio no era nueva. A lo largo del cristianismo, el martirio se ha considerado como evidencia de los confesores de la fe en Cristo. La sangre derramada y las vejaciones padecidas por los inocentes es prueba indiscutible de la victoria de la fe. En la tradición hagiográfica, tanto en las descripciones literarias como en las representaciones visuales, se exalta la aflicción corporal y la muerte violenta que contrasta con la aceptación y serenidad en los rostros de las víctimas. Sin duda, en estas imágenes de dolor hay una intención de ejemplaridad para conmover al espectador y conducirlo a la compasión. Son imágenes efectistas que producen atracción y repulsión a la vez. El mártir se observa estoico y acepta su destino en medio de la atrocidad que sucede a su alrededor. Entonces, si se fijan, aquí en la pira central están atados todos los sacerdotes cholultecas y alrededor está la gente que está huyendo, ¿no? Y aquí, si se fijan, de alguna manera es como si fuera se estuviera ofreciendo como si fueran víctimas de sacrificio desde el punto de vista cristiano, vamos a decir en un holocausto, como si fueran corderos. Okay. La mortificación de los santos señala un lugar en la memoria. El sufrimiento marca y singulariza el espacio, transformándolo en un lugar sagrado, escogido y revelado por la voluntad divina. Es por eso que en estos sitios, según las construcciones legendarias, suceden acontecimientos hierofánicos o extraordinarios y son marcados con la cruz o mediante la construcción de capillas o santuarios donde se atesoran las reliquias de estos inocentes martirizados. En esta retórica visual, Cholula evoca los lugares donde sucedieron martirios masivos en la geografía desde los primeros tiempos del cristianismo, es decir, la masacre de un gran número de víctimas durante un ataque despiadado. La ejecución de los inocentes por Herodes fue tomada como una prefigura exegética de la persecución de la Iglesia que había sido vaticinada en las Sagradas Escrituras y alcanzaría su apoteosis en la ciudad eterna, bajo el mandato de emperadores persecutores de los cristianos. Déjenme cambiar la siguiente. Uy, ahora no me hace caso. No, aquí está. No, no me hace caso. No, no me cambia. Ya, ok. Uy, ya se fue todas, ¿no? Ok, ya, ok. A ver, me salté una, ¿no? Ok, ahí está. Ok. Ok. Particularmente la matanza de Cholula se corresponde con los martirios masivos en contextos milicianos. Es el caso de los 10,000 soldados romanos liderados por el Primiceus Acacio de Armenia, asesinados por órdenes del emperador romano Decio a mano de los partos por negarse a abjurar el del cristianismo. Su conversión a la fe de Cristo había ocurrido por la intervención milagrosa de un ángel que les había otorgado la victoria en la rebelión del Éufrates. Según una geografía o pasio del siglo XIII proveniente de Anastasios Bibliotecarius del siglo IX, esto sucedió en el monte Ararat, en Anatolia. Llama la atención que en un grabado de Durero de 1497, que pueden ver en la pantalla, trata sobre este episodio. La escena central es muy similar al grabado de Cholula de Teodoro de Brie. Si ustedes se fijan, esta escena y esta escena tienen muchas similitudes. Cabe señalar que en la imagen de Durero la matanza sucede sobre el monte, mientras que en el grabado de Debris los cerros se observan en el horizonte a distancia formando parte del paisaje. A ver si ahora sí me hace caso. No me hace caso, no quiere. Yo creo que igual es acá. No entiendo por qué no me... A ver, ok. Ya, ok. Un relato semejante que tuvo gran impacto en toda Europa es el suplicio del comandante romano Mauricio y la legión tebana, también convertidos al cristianismo y que supuestamente ocurrió en el siglo III en Agauno, actualmente en Valais, Suiza. Mauricio y sus hombres fueron masacrados por órdenes de los emperadores Maximiano y Diocleciano junto al monte Tauredunum en el valle del Ródano. Tal como se muestra en la conocida pintura del Greco, que es lo que están viendo ustedes en pantalla, fechada en 1580, fue mandada a hacer por encargo del rey Felipe II. En España, San Mauricio se consideraba patrón especial contra las herejías y su devoción fue impulsado por la corona en contra precisamente de los reformistas. En esta obra con crudeza se muestran los cuerpos desnudos de los tebanos que resignados y en oración son atormentados, pero tras la muerte reciben el premio de la gloria eterna. Nótese la luz celestial que impregna el sitio del martirio, que al igual que el humo en el grabado de Brie, unen el cielo con la tierra donde está sucediendo precisamente la masacre. Ok. En efecto, un elemento común a estas historias es que sucede en o junto a una montaña, elemento que se repite como un locus martyrium. En muchos otros relatos, por ejemplo, Montmartre, que se puede traducir como Monte del Martirio, sitio donde perdió la cabeza San Dionisio en las cercanías de París, o bien la colina vaticana Mons Vaticanus en Roma, corazón de la iglesia, porque allí precisamente fue crucificado el apóstol San Pedro. Contrarios a estos discursos, los conquistadores y sus aliados arguyeron la supuesta traición de las élites cholultecas como razón por la que tuvo lugar el súbito ataque. Bajo esta óptica, el discurso se torna triunfalista, en donde las huestes españolas y sus aliados en buena justicia aniquilaron al enemigo alevoso. Déjenme, a ver si quiere o no. No, o sea, ya, es que se tarda. Ok. En el Códice de Cholula, que es este precisamente, de tradición indígena, que bueno, ahí dice que está fechado en 1586, pero expertos como González Hermosillo, por ejemplo, él dice que pudo haber sido hecho después. Yo considero que es ya del siglo XVII, antes de 1640, porque no habla de la secularización de la Iglesia por Palafox, pues de la doctrina. Sin embargo, podría estar fechado alrededor de la primera década o las dos primeras décadas del siglo XVII. Pero bueno, aquí se representa la matanza a las faldas del Tlachihualtépetl. Ahí pueden ver en la esquina superior el Tlachihualtépetl o la Gran Pirámide. Y en las glosas en náhuatl se relata cómo la india cacica Doña María Ilamateutli, o reina de la ciudad de Cholula y amiga de los españoles, alerta a los conquistadores de la traición preparada por su esposo, el gobernante principal. El códice retoma el tema de la tradición narrada por Cortés y por Bernal Díaz del Castillo, y así, en ese contexto, la cacica se convirtió en una heroína que alcanza el bautizo como signo de su pacto con los cristianos extranjeros. De esta manera, la fe de Cristo triunfa sobre la idolatría. Sin embargo, si analizamos con detalle, en la pintura se enfatiza la crueldad, a pesar de considerarse la muerte de los cholultecas como un merecido castigo. En las faldas del Tlachihualtépetl se observan dos personajes que atacan con lanzas. Son difíciles de ver, pero bueno, aquí pueden ver de este lado uno que está a pie y hay otro abajo que está a caballo. Dice, se observan dos personajes que atacan con lanzas, uno montado a caballo y otro apiado, mientras dos indígenas heridos, armados con chimali y macahuitl, combaten hasta la muerte. El terreno está sembrado por los cuerpos abatidos o cercenados, podemos ver inclusive cabezas, piernas, brazos, ¿no?, cubiertos de sangre. En esta zona, sobre el papel amate, aparecen manchones de color carmesí, alusión violenta de la sangre derramada que marca el lugar de la embestida. Es decir, aquí estas manchas de sangre están marcando el espacio, pero no nada más desde el punto de vista de, digamos, que visualmente que se diga la violencia, sino también es una manera de decir que la sangre derramada hace un espacio diferente, lo singulariza, le da una connotación distinta. Ok. Dice, en el centro del combate se aprecia el templo del dios blanco Quetzalcóatl, asimilado con Santo Tomás y que funciona como presagio simbólico de la fundación de lo que después sería la Iglesia en América, que al igual que en Roma fue erigida a partir del suplicio de los santos. Ay, no. Ok. Finalmente, en el lienzo de Tlaxcala, versión 18esca del pintor Juan Manuel Ibáñez, copia del lienzo anterior realizado en 1552, se representa la victoria de Hernán Cortés sobre la desafortunada ciudad sagrada. Esta también es una escena triunfalista de la conquista, sin embargo tiene semejanzas con el Códice de Cholula. Cortés victorioso y a caballo lleva lanza en mano, igual que el otro personaje que estaba en el Códice de Cholula, y simula un Marco Aurelio o inclusive un Santiago Caballero, y está acompañado por doña Marina ataviada como cacica. Al fondo un soldado arremete contra los indios, también si se fijan es con lanza, que a pesar de la inminente derrota aún intenta defender su templo. Al igual que en el Códice de Cholula, en primer plano destacan los cuerpos esparcidos, mutilados y ensangrentados que se asemejan con los soldados mártires representados en el grabado de Durero o el tormento y decapitación de la legión tebana en la pintura del Greco. Tal como se advierte en estos ejemplos, el martirio se confunde con el castigo y se torna difícil diferenciar entre verdugos y vencedores, entre valerosos caballos cristianos o herejes envilecidos. En estos discursos, el espacio sagrado es trastocado por el campo de batalla, las víctimas por derrotados. Así pues, la causa justa enmascara la violencia de la guerra. No obstante, es la masacre y es el dolor lo que señala el espacio y deja una huella profunda en la memoria. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Denise, por mostrarnos un poco de este difícil tema de la dimensión sagrada del dolor y del sacrificio y el martirio, que me imagino, si entendí bien, están presentes tanto en las culturas prehispánicas como en las coloniales, pero quizá de una manera distinta, ¿verdad? Bueno, si nos quisieran acompañar los panelistas en la mesa para poder responder a las preguntas del público. Uy, ya tenemos manos levantadas.
Muchísimas gracias y muchas felicidades a toda la mesa. Yo tenía una pregunta para Denise, porque bueno, tenemos como muchas afinidades de investigación. Y bueno, más que pregunta es comentario. Ya salieron las digitalizaciones del García Panes, ¿no? Del teatro, ¿qué, ¿cómo lees esa relectura del siglo XVIII justo sobre los temas que nos diste a conocer el día de hoy?
Lo que pasa es que para cada circunstancia hay una readaptación, pero lo que yo veo es que hay fórmulas que se establecen y que son fórmulas que se establecen desde, digamos, los primeros tiempos del cristianismo y que son discursos apologéticos sobre todo, ¿no? Y entonces lo que va sucediendo es que para cada caso se van readaptando, ¿no? Entonces cuando hay todas estas, sobre todo en el siglo XVIII, ya con una visión ilustrada, ¿no? Se le trata de dar una lectura algo diferente, sin embargo, la fórmula, a mi parecer, a mi consideración, permanece igual. O sea, son relatos iguales y que de alguna manera tienden también a dar este ejemplo, ¿no? El ejemplo del buen cristiano, finalmente, el virtuoso, y que es a través del sufrimiento, ¿no? Que el virtuoso no se deja tentar, digamos, por el dolor, que a pesar del dolor, a pesar de la muerte, se mantiene en la firmeza, en la fe o en las buenas virtudes. Entonces yo creo que eso sigue estando precisamente en la reedición del siglo XVIII. Sí, de nada.
Other questions.
Gracias. Bueno, primero hay que decir que me encantaron las dos ponencias de prehispánicos, la de Oaxaca, la de los mayas, por supuesto. Aunque yo tengo un comentario para Denise, que ahora que estaba hablando se me ocurrían algunas cosas. Eh, Cuando comparaste este tema de la matanza de Cholula con el grabado de Durero, de el martirio de estos cristianos que estaban en el monte Ararat, me vino a la mente también el tema del profeta Elías y del monte Carmelo, ¿no? Y entonces yo en las tres casos puedo encontrar que hay montaña sagrada, sangre, pero también hay lluvia. O sea, las tres cosas, ¿no? Primero en el Monte Carmelo, pues todo todo le provocó la sequía, ¿no? Y Elías colocó agua alrededor de su ofrenda y después vino la lluvia y fue la masacre de los 400 sacerdotes, 450 sacerdotes de Baal. Y luego en el segundo, el monte Ararat, arriba se posó el arca de Noé, no olvidemos, ¿sí? También. Y en el tercero, en Cholula, Arriba estaba la pirámide de Chicomecat-Quiahuitl, ¿no? Del nueve lluvia, ¿no? Y a los pies la matanza. Entonces, hay una cosa aquí que sangre, agua, que ese intercambio de sangre por agua era muy mesoamericano, desde luego, pero también sangre y agua nos recuerda el bautismo, ¿no? Y la sangre redentora de Cristo, ¿no?
Sí, definitivamente no es casualidad. Y estaba también pensando desde también cuando va a ser el sacrificio de Isaac. O sea, todos los sacrificios se hacen precisamente en montañas, en montes, porque son los lugares más elevados y actúan como un axis mundi. Es un axis mundi que está conectando, digamos, precisamente lo terrenal con lo celestial, ¿no? Con Dios. Y yo creo que esta cuestión que tú dices de la sangre, y lo veo muy claramente, sobre todo en el Códice de Cholula, estos manchones de sangre, es una manera como de fertilizar la tierra. O sea, yo sí siento que es como marcar, pero también es como un líquido precioso que de alguna manera se está derramando para hacer una transformación del espacio. Y en el caso sí es como una combinación, es también como una fórmula en donde siempre está el axis mundi, que es la montaña, y aparece en el mundo cristiano y aparece en el mundo mesoamericano. Y por otro lado está la sangre como elemento precioso que transforma, que pues, también las ofrendas en las bíblicas, en las Sagradas Escrituras, pues hay que matar un cordero. O sea, tienes que matar el cordero y la sangre sale y después lo quemas. Y es el humo lo que conecta, digamos, después de quemarlo con Dios. Entonces hay toda esta tradición escrituraria de la ofrenda y que aparecen estos mismos elementos en Cholula, pero algo que a mí me llama también mucho la atención es que constituye también una fórmula visual. Es decir, todos estos elementos se convierten en toda una fórmula visual que se está repitiendo y repitiendo, y lo que está sucediendo es que se va readaptando a las diferentes localizaciones. Entonces, se vuelve un tiempo circular de la memoria. Y entonces, al hacer, por ejemplo, los mártires de Cholula, a la misma vez se está evocando estos mártires de Ararat, estos mártires o estos ofrendas de sacrificio de las Sagradas Escrituras. Entonces es un tiempo sin tiempo. Eso es lo interesante.
Es como lo que dice Victoria Bricker en su libro del telescoping time, ¿no? De este tiempo plegado, ¿no?
Son discursos impuestos y son discursos políticos. O sea, es toda una apología. O sea, fue una matanza, fue un genocidio por la conquista, por los intereses de la conquista, pero sin embargo era una manera pues de darle una justificación a esta matanza y además pues echarle la culpa a Dios. O sea, pues fue la providencia que así lo quiso y fueron señalados y fueron escogidos, y de alguna manera ellos pues tuvieron que morir para dar un nuevo orden, porque también la matanza de Cholula es dar final al tiempo de la gentilidad, de lo indígena, de la idolatría, de que estaban engañados por el demonio, pero que de alguna manera tenían esa inclinación religiosa y ahora se redirigieron a un nuevo orden a través ya de la imposición del cristianismo, ¿no? Como la verdadera fe. Entonces también es dar un fin para un nuevo ciclo, una nueva historia, ¿no? Bajo el cristianismo.
Gracias a todos. This question is for Claudia. Thank you so much for giving us a new way of thinking about El Castillo. The two structures that come to mind that resonate in some ways with El Castillo are the fluted cupcake of La Venta and the main building at El Tajín the Pyramid of the Niches, that's it. And I'm just wondering, I don't know enough about either of those to really say, but clearly the absence of a large plaza like the type that we see at Chichen makes it not a fair comparison. But I do wonder about the niches in particular, that pyramid, because I wonder if there isn't also some interesting kind of public conversation happening between the facade of that structure and the viewers. And I just wondered if you could say a word about that in your opinion.
Thanks, Delia. Those are both fascinating comparisons. So, I mean, it always surprises me when I go to Tajín just how small the public spaces at that site are. It's one of the things that has always sort of puzzled me most about it. And so that's a pyramid that has that decoration around all four sides, but it really, once again, still has that single staircase. And it's, you know, like you actually have to kind of squeeze yourself to get around the sides. And so the view is really narrowly focused on that side with the principal staircase. And you think also about how close it is to some of those, you know, there's that palace right next to it. And so I think of it as much more that kind of traditional Mesoamerican plan. You know, even though, you know, you get different numbers when you count the niches. And so there are things that you can sort of, you know, there may be things that you can see there, but it doesn't have quite that impact. And it's not built for pilgrimage in the same way. Now, I do think that La Venta is built for pilgrimage in some ways, and it's interesting, you know, we still don't know quite what shape that was. I mean, I tend to believe Rebecca Gonzalez-Lauk that, you know, it wasn't always sort of as organically cupcake-like as it is now, that it really had, you know, sort of more structured, you know, cuerpos or bodies or levels to it. It is still a building that has different kinds of address. You know, so there is this really large plaza to the south where you're elevated, you know, which and there's a platform that elevates that pyramid above that plaza. And then there's a sort of much more restricted and directed view from Complex A to the north. But to get from one of those to the other is actually quite difficult, you know? So once again, like maybe there's some people, the platform, like that raised platform that the pyramid is on is actually quite, you know, by La Venta scale, it's not huge. And so this is, I think of that as actually a pyramid that really segments its audience in different ways, that there's something that happens in that huge plaza to the south, and there's something really different that happens with the people who have access to Complex A, but these aren't necessarily the same kinds of people. I also think that as one of the first really big pyramids in Mesoamerica, this is a building that is really changing dynamics of viewership. That you think about the sort of early phases in Complex A at La Venta, where you have the massive offerings, right, that are, you know, that are excavated down, and so you have a kind of vantage where you're standing and circumambulating and looking down onto those offerings as they're being constructed, and that's a kind of limited experience. And then but it's a really communal experience because, you know, everyone who's standing in that space, you know, like you're seeing that offering from different angles, but there's not more privileged access for some people than for others. I mean, like maybe you build scaffolds to be able to actually see down, but by the time you build the pyramid, which is really probably a phase or two later than those massive offerings, then suddenly it's not that everyone has that same view on ground level. Some people get to be on top, some people get to see the people being on top. And what you see over those, you know, sort of 4 or 5 centuries at La Venta is kind of the development of inequality in Mesoamerica and how it sort of restructures and shapes viewing audiences.
Un momentito.
Muchas felicidades a los tres, muy interesante las pláticas. Una pregunta para Denise, es del manuscrito del aperreamiento. ¿Crees que tenga un mensaje semejante en términos de que se están sacrificando a los líderes, en este caso, o piensas que es otro discurso?
Sí, digo, por cuestiones de tiempo no traje el aperramiento, pero definitivamente yo ahí encuentro otro discurso, porque es un discurso más bien de escarnio. Es escarnio porque si lo recuerdo bien, en medio están los sacerdotes, están además encadenados de los pies, si no mal recuerdo, y de las manos, y están los perros. Y por otro lado está Cortés en silla de caderas y está acompañado creo que también por Doña Marina. Doña Marina trae el rosario en las manos y luego arriba están, o de lado creo que están los otros sacerdotes, o sea, los que siguen también encadenados, que están viendo el martirio de los que, o sea, el que les van a asesinar al que está junto al perro. Pero me parece que ahí tiene una finalidad distinta, porque ahí más bien yo creo que Cortés y las autoridades, digamos, en ese momento de los conquistadores, lo que quieren es provocar miedo. Provocar miedo porque además son los sacerdotes. Es una manera de desgajar todo el sistema político de Mesoamérica, porque Cholula era el lugar del entronamiento de los gobernantes de diferentes lugares de Mesoamérica. Entonces, el decir, somos tan poderosos que hacemos esto con sus sacerdotes, a mí me parece que era una manera de escarmiento, más de escarmiento. En cambio, estos documentos que les enseñé, bueno, están, digamos, por un lado, están aquellos que los quieren hacer como mártires para justificar y decir que la providencia había señalado ese lugar como Nueva Roma y eran como los mártires cristianos. Y por otro lado está el triunfalismo, de que, bueno, pues como eran idólatras, pues ni modo, y que ellos llegaron a salvarlos de la idolatría y pues ni modo tenía que haber caídos. Pero en el caso del aperramiento es muy, muy peculiar, porque sí yo creo que era más bien como amedrentar y desestabilizar el mundo mesoamericano y sobre todo en sus creencias religiosas, porque son los sacerdotes que entronan. Yo creo que es eso.
Thanks. These were all great papers. My question is for Claudia, and maybe kind of picking up on some of the last discussion. Well, thanks for just pointing out how these very basic features of the Castillo are actually quite distinctive. Do you have any evidence, or could you even just speculate about with the facades of that pyramid, how they might have been stuccoed and painted, or forgive me, I don't recall if the rectangular panels along the facades, if those are terribly distinctive features, but is there anything that suggests there are other features that might have complemented this ability to kind of circumambulate around the pyramid like you discuss?
I don't think we know much about so there's surviving paint on some of the jambs and the serpent columns. And so we get the sense that those things were brightly painted, like most Maya sculpture, they're painted in a sort of relatively limited number of colors, although you get a little bit more polychromy on sculpture at Chichen than you do at classic Maya cities, where you're really sort of limited to 3 colors at a time. Maybe you get 6 or 8. I do not know that any traces of paint survived on those sort of dentate moldings. People have, I think it's maybe Kubler who first sees a kind of relationship to Oaxacan architecture in those, and it's part of what makes the Castillo feel so cosmopolitan, that it's bringing these different forms together. And we know that those might have been painted, probably red and white, right? So that they really pop and there's a kind of contrast. I can convince myself that happened at Chichen Itza as well, but I don't have a lot of evidence for it. As far as evidence for circumambulation or ritual around it, the site is so intervened from, it continues to be a place that people are returning to long after the city is abandoned in ways that are, deeply moving, but have also effaced a lot of traces that we would love to be able to see. One thing I can say is that we do know that that temple at the top has doorways on all four sides. And in fact, sort of, you know, it's a real, once again, it's a really different and I think quite innovative floor plan. So instead of having those kind of parallel chambers in this way that you can take back to classic Maya cities, you have, once again, the structure of these two, you know, we walk through one room into the other room on the north side. And then on the other three sides, there is, in fact, this corridor that goes around and that has these kinds of like really specialized vaulting stones in order to do this. But what that means is that you could have people walking unseen inside the building and then appearing out of those four sides of the temple in a way that I think is actually quite different, once again, from what any building in Mesoamerica had enabled before that point. And so I love the idea that everybody's sort of wandering, you know, that the crowd is moving in some kind of coordinated way around the building, but that's a fantasy. I don't have any evidence for it yet.
Espero no abusar. Tengo para cada uno una pregunta. Robert, cuando mostraste uno de los vasos con las garras y te referías a Castillo, y hay una fecha, 2 y un arbolito, ¿hay manera de correlacionar con el calendario actual?
Tenemos muchísimos ejemplares de dos. Y el señor, su compañero es el señor Jaguar. El día Lache o día 6 o 7, no me acuerdo, en el pie también. Entonces sí, toman sus nombres de acuerdo con la fecha de su nacimiento. Y es lo que es curiosamente, es curioso, es que solamente en los vasos sencillos llevan los nombres calendáricos. Cuando se transforma el formato en vasija efigie, se desaparecen los nombres calendáricos, pero la señora sigue siendo la señora 2Na, porque tiene una lote enorme en su tocado. Y por otro lado, el jaguar, parece jaguar, es su compañero, pero tiene la cabeza de un murciélago. Entonces, es una transformación en el momento de guerra, porque en algunos ejemplares llevan su escudo y la lanza en algunos. Entonces, es una cuestión de juntar muchos ejemplares del mismo género para ver cuáles detalles están revelando en cada iteración. Pero sí, es por eso. Pero sí, precisamente son los nombres calendáricos. Hay una pequeña discusión si son deidades o son personajes históricos. Y estoy a favor de personajes históricos porque el lapso de uso es muy corto, de 500 después de Cristo hasta 800 después de Cristo. Y en el posclásico, el vaso garra en forma de jaguar sigue, se desaparece el murciélago por completo en este formato de murciélago. Pues gracias.
Para Claudia. Es famoso el Castillo, maravilla del mundo, y el evento de la hierofanía equinoccial, pues sí, es espectacular, pero no sucede solo el día del equinoccio, sino un intervalo de tiempo. Un colega de allá que trabaja en el INA ha hecho el ejercicio por varios años de observar, y entonces él puede digamos, describir el patrón de iluminación, desde que no hay nada hasta que aparece el primer resplandor, y así aparece 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 triángulos. Y lo único que puedo adelantar es que estas sucesiones de iluminación tienen que ver con estas fechas extrañas que se encuentran en las alineaciones. El primer resplandor, por ejemplo, cosas así. Por otra parte, la subestructura, si uno entra, que ya no es fácil ahora entrar, pero gracias al proyecto de pintura mural entramos varias veces, entramos. Si uno cuenta los escalones, dice 63, 64, no está muy claro, pero todavía falta de excavar. Entonces yo planteo que probablemente si afuera son 91, 7 veces 13, adentro podrían ser 5 veces 13, un cosillo. Y los colegas geofísicos de la UNAM que han encontrado una sub-sub, bueno, ahí no se ha excavado, yo apuesto que fueran 7, 5, 3, 39, pero eso hasta que se excabe. Entonces, eso queda todavía al futuro, en algún momento se podría excavar.
Y para Denise, ¿tenías otra?
Bueno, esto fue solo un comentario. Bueno, ahora Denise.
De saber de este pirámide tan famoso, pero siempre surgen nuevas cosas, ¿no? Es impresionante.
Perdón, ahora que escuchaba a Jesús, se me ocurrían unas cosas. Es muy interesante lo que comentaste, Robert, de que si está la imagen de estos personajes, no está su nombre calendárico, pero si no está la imagen, sí está su nombre calendárico. Es la presencia de la palabra sagrada, porque finalmente la notación calendárica pues son logogramas también, ¿no? Y luego me acordé de las páginas estas del Códice de Dresde, de los ciclos de la meteorología, de la lluvia, que está ese ciclo del 364 días del año computado, 4 veces 91, ¿no? Sí, sí, sí.
Denise, en los 60 Matos Moctezuma excavó en Cholula y según recuerdo, en el patio que está enfrente de la Capilla Real encontró gran cantidad de cuerpos, porque según Motolinia, recuerdo que comenta que el cerrito, que es la pirámide, caían constantemente rayos y entonces para evitar eso puso una cruz y para ponerle a la cruz vieron que había ídolos. Entonces, como que este uso del símbolo máximo, yo diría, se dice que es la pirámide más grande del mundo por volumen. Las de Egipto son más altas, pero son varias pirámides. Entonces, como que uno se preguntaría, según recuerdo por ahí alguna cita de algún cronista, que donde está la capilla real era el templo dedicado a Quetzalcóatl, porque la pirámide, como dices, es de la lluvia, ¿no? Entonces, como que ahí sería bueno excavar, pero no es tan fácil con una ciudad viva.
Miguel de Rojas es el cronista que hace la relación de Cholula para las relaciones geográficas, la hace en 1586, si no mal recuerdo, y efectivamente el primero que llega es Motolinía, y él dice, lo que él dice es que estaba encima de la Gran Pirámide, efectivamente caían rayos y pues no había manera de contener esos rayos, y entonces pone primero una cruz, pero le cae un rayo de todas maneras, entonces no es suficiente, y excavan y sacan, y él dice que saca caracoles, que son precisamente caracoles y unas figuras de ranas, de sapos. Entonces, por eso también se le asocia de esta leyenda de que cayó un gran sapo cuando lo estaban construyendo como un castigo, digamos, que está en la relación de Chichimeca. Pero lo interesante es que después de que no funciona la cruz, ponen una campana y con la campana ya no caen rayos, según lo que dice Motolinía. Entonces es muy interesante porque es el sonido cristiano lo que cristianiza esa montaña. O sea, lo que le quita el demonio y lo que quita esta cuestión poderosa del dios maligno o diabólico anterior, ¿no? Es el sonido, no la figura de la cruz. sino el sonido de la campana. Y es muy sugerente eso porque vemos que digamos, el sonido de la campana se utiliza para congregar a la iglesia, es decir, a todos los miembros, a todos los cristianos. Entonces, también una manera de sacralizar el espacio es esta congregación por medio del sonido cristiano que sustituye el sonido diabólico, pagano, sobre todo los caracoles de viento, ¿no? En este caso.
Muchísimas gracias, Denise. Encuentro que estas preguntas y respuestas al final de las ponencias suelen ser de lo más enriquecedor. Muchísimas gracias a todos por sus participaciones. Gracias a nuestros panelistas. Creo que se merecen un gran aplauso y un diploma. Sus diplomas de participación, igual que a todos los demás. Y les invitamos a seguir conversando en la habitación de al lado, bueno, cuarto de al lado, están esperando nuestros box lunches, así que allí podemos pasar a hacer nuestro lunch o salir al jardín y regresamos. Bueno, después vamos a continuar con las visitas al cuarto piso con Claudia Brittenham para quienes quieran ver algunos de los tesoros de la biblioteca. Está increíble, no se lo pierdan, suban, es una gran oportunidad. Y también estamos invitados a visitar la exhibición Indigenous Chicago y regresaremos aquí para nuestra última mesa a las 2:30. A las 2:30 nos vemos aquí para nuestro último panel. Muchas gracias.